change where we are today. So I will start with our imam on the panel to talk a little bit about, and then everyone please feel free to chime in.
Islamophobia, obviously we're going to deal with it. It's a fear that's based on really lack of knowledge. It's instigated fear, really. As you mentioned, it's a new term. And Muslims have been here for a long time. They've been engaged, as I've mentioned. We've heard Islam is not a new term in America. Maybe Muhammad Ali, you've heard of the Nation of Islam as it's growing, Malcolm X. It's not new in American society. But so what has happened over these 15 years or so that's now made it something that should be feared, that word is Islam. And again, we know human nature, we fear what we don't know. And there was a recent poll that said that more than 50% of Americans don't know a Muslim. They don't know. They never met one. That's a significant number. And so if you have obviously 9/11, this is when this term comes up after 9/11, and there's a face now put on this name. But again, it's a different face than what was on the name before 9/11. Because again, as I mentioned, before 9/11, really African Americans had a significant piece of what Islam was in America. Because Muhammad Ali was so outspoken, he was on the world stage, etc. It was a different piece there. And but when I was doing a book, and in the book it was I didn't finish. It was my thesis actually. It was on Islam, nationalism, terrorism, are universal. And it's 80% finished. I didn't get to finish the book. But in the book, it showed that my empirical data showed that most people either saw Islam as being nationalism, as you know, because of the growth of it, how they saw it in America, associated with quote unquote what was called black Muslims. So this was a large number of folks saw. That was the definition. That something. The other one was this terrorism, because there was a piece of, although America hadn't had it to that degree when I did this thesis, it was happening overseas. Mm-hmm. So these were two things that were related to what it was. Again, most people not really knowing what it is, and they didn't really explore the way it came in America. It wasn't universal. Islam in its development, its growth in universal. The aspiration was universal, which was the term that said Islam was freedom, justice, and equality. That's the universal, and that's the aspiration of every human soul. That was universal, but how it was taught at that time wasn't. And again, that was just it was meant for a particular purpose and the psychology there. So we fear naturally, and we look at us as a state of nature, things that we don't know. We're not comfortable. We're not comfortable. So if you don't know, and then you see something bad associated with something that you don't know, then that kind of maximizes that fear that you already have, especially not knowing. And then when you get significant people, like right now we're seeing a spike happening at this particular time. It's bigger, it's since 9/11, this is the biggest spike we're seeing right now, because a significant figure, or influential figure now is opening up that fear. And it's based on a small group, as we know, not the bigger group. And so the more we know, just like I mentioned in terms of what I did when I was in the military, when I educated them on this population and what we were doing over what they saw, then things begin to change. So we can get more of our leaders. I'm talking about congressional leaders, because these are the ones that represent states, etc. To speak out more and show the beauty of the life, the citizens. I mean, this is about citizens in America. And then these citizens really, because in America, Muslims has the most diverse population of its population in terms of religion. There's no more diversity in other religions than there is in Islam. So that tells us that in Islam, in America, every nation is represented. So if we can see the beauty of the citizens that come from certain nations, and also you have to understand that Muslims in America that come from these various nations where we're seeing problems from, the Muslims in America from those nations are the most educated Muslims now in the world. You know, because we know they have many of our nations, they haven't been doing a good job in the education area, which causes some of the problems. So the more we do things like what we're doing now, and get our elected officials and others who are very significant and influential to highlight that beauty, we would get more progress to solving the problem.
You know, it's an interesting concept. So, and Reverend, I'm going to turn to you now, and that is, I've heard our imam tell us many times that we've got to get the elected officials involved. We've got to get the elected officials sending a different message and highlighting the beauty of Islam. Do you think that's a part of some of our elected officials' agenda right now? Why do you think that they are stirring, some of them are stirring the pot, for example, and not showing the beauty of Islam right now? Is there a reason? Kind of, you said you grew up in rural Tennessee, and you kind of think that you represent. I'm using your words. But you represent. No, you represent folks who were trying to kind of expose to the diversity of Islam. So my question just is this Islamophobia being used by elected officials? And also, what do you think is the role of the media right now in this conversation?
Yeah, I shouldn't have opened myself up to all those questions. Well, I was just in a meeting with some other national organizations that work against Islamophobia, and our conversation was focused on this intersection of race and Islamophobia. And we had quite a bit of conversation about, are we in a new moment or not? And for anybody who came through the George Wallace era, you have a hard time believing this is new. It's another verse, but it's kind of the same song. And politics in the South has, for a long time, been built around fear of the other. You had to do that with the Native Americans to suppress your compassion towards Native Americans in order to drive them off their land. You had to suppress your humanity and your compassion towards African Americans in order to keep them in slavery. So you've constantly had to have people exerting social peer pressure on vulnerable people in order to keep them organized against another group of people. So in a way, this is just like home court play for a lot of legislative tradition. The civil rights movement elevated all that again. So this fear of the other has been an organizing principle of Southern society for a very, very long time. And then religion has tended to reinforce that because of Christianity, for example, might cause people of different races to look at each other differently, and you can't have that happen or it'll topple the whole social order. So there's been a massive amount of energy in books and movies and every kind of short story and kid's story to make it clear that if people of different races and cultures ever get together, it will be an unmitigated disaster, and the people who will die first are the white people. So let's just be clear about that. And you can hear that, all the way from the governor of Arkansas in 1956, all the way through the desegregation, this is going to be an absolute disaster. And the civil rights movement caused the South's, economy to explode by 25%. So actually bringing people together of different races has been a huge boon to everybody. But we haven't heard that out of our elected officials because politically we haven't made this turn to say to people, we're much better off together than we are apart. All the energy that goes into driving people apart is a waste from every point of view you want to look at. But politically, one of the things that's happened, and I'll just say this from that point of view of the people I represent, not because I represent them, but I take compassion on them because I think they're being played, is the fact that, I'll just take it this way. Are you the only person in this room like you? Do all of you feel really comfortable in this room right now? Like you fit in here? I was with my uncle at a thing the other night. He was the only person in the room wearing a tie. And it worried him the whole night. I'm the only guy in here with a tie. I'm the only guy in here with a tie. And that's the nervousness of a lot of people, they feel like they don't belong, so they're listening for somebody to say you belong. And unfortunately, some of the voices that are the loudest about you can belong with our group are some of the most dysfunctional, dangerous groups out there across every culture. And we've not done a very good job sometimes on the rest of society to say to folks, there's a way to belong without having to be just like the person sitting beside you. And you can have people in your community, and it'll actually be more fun than if it's all the same. And we can learn a different level of what it means to be human. But that's a conversation that you don't get to have in politics very often because somebody starts yelling at you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that was a good leading question. I don't know whether I hit that softball
Well, I want
or
to go
not,
back
but-
to it, actually. So I want to go back to it, which is, do you think that some of our elected officials are using
Oh, I think
the
the most
fear
is,
right now?
I think the most Islamophobic place in the country right now is Washington, D.C.
Okay, wow.
I mean, there are other competitors, don't get me wrong here, but because it's such a politically useful tool, because it activates all of these previous discussions in a nice way. So we talk, this conversation I was in, we've talked about the racialization of religion. This has happened before with Catholics, but with Islam, we're talking about a non-Christian group. So that just makes it easier to do the divisive stuff, and it makes it a challenge for us to build these honest relationships with each other that don't try to pretend we're all the same. So,
And then one more point on that, too. What about the media? I mean,
the media, I'm afraid, and I don't know who the media is. I mean, there's some wonderful people in the media, but the media is out to sell papers, and so if it bleeds, it leads, and so it focuses on conflict, not on reconciliation. So if you can start a fight, you'll get in the paper. If you end it, you won't.
so we're going to get back to that in a second because we're going to talk about the how we actually counter Islamophobia. But before we do, I want to turn to Dr. Hawkins, who's our specialist on the panel on the relation of racism and religion, and kind of ask you about the correlation here that we're talking about the deep-rootedness of racism in the country and how Islamophobia is interacting without already existing the concept of racism, and kind of like hear your thoughts about it, while also at the same time, because Islam, so many different followers of Islam and so many different Muslims come from so many different races. So what does that mean? And one more thing, and that is some of Islamophobia rooted in Arab phobia? And is that because of what's going on in the Middle East right now? So I'll turn it over to you.
That's a lot of great questions. And I feel like I was set up really well, obviously, by Robert, who I didn't know before I came here. But I'm going to go attack that maybe not natural, which is to say Islamophobia is the American way. It reflects our deeply held American values, the American creed, which is the American dream, which is the American cult. It's the American religion. Capitalism qua Christianity. Capitalism by way of Max Weber, working to prove your calling and election, sure. What's evidence of faith? Money. Greed. Capital. Storing it up. Storing up treasures for yourself here on earth, if we just want to stick with the religious vernacular, right? That's Americanism. And you don't have to profess Christianity, right? Because the good Christians included the Jews because they had to. Judeo-Christian, well, because they just couldn't, they realized they couldn't interpret Christianity without the Abrahamics, but now they're willing to leave Muslims out, because if you say we worship the same God because we're of the same Abrahamic faith, something bad could happen to you, right? That's not self-referential, I promise. But getting back to this, politics as religion, we need to remember that neither religion nor politics occur in a historical vacuum. Because all of our faiths are rooted in a past moment, the kind of creation, but all of our religions were folk before they were codified in writing, right? There's an oral history that relates to all of the religions that we follow or don't follow, right? Even atheism, right? There's a great philosophical tradition of atheism, right? That may not be called as such. So when we realize that, and then we like realize who we are as a country, the rootedness of our religion in this particular space and time. You know, the American Creed is always forward-looking, it's always entrepreneurial, and it's based on this notion of a city on a hill, right? And that city on a hill looks not back to the past, it looks forward, but it always is doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, because respectful remembrance is the stuff that reconciliation is made of, not forgetting. Or not pretending shit didn't happen, right? So shit's happening on our watch. I wasn't gonna say a bad word, but it just happened.
See why you're not at Wheaton anymore, but anyway.
But my granny might watch this. So politics and religion have always mixed in the US, but beyond that, the state is a cult. Political scientists and historians, we call this civil religion. The imperial cult of America, think about Rome, ancient Rome. It's replete with icons and sacrifices, including bodily sacrifices. That's what he did for 31 years, right? That's what my uncle did in Vietnam. That's what my grandfather did in World War II, so he could come home and be spit on, right? That's the American creed. That's the American religion. That's how we worship as a country. Monuments, prayers, paeans to the country, liturgy, worship, practiced. The nation's pastor, the president, operates in prophetic ways sometimes and priestly ways sometimes. In these modes, blessing the nation and calling us to higher ideals when it seems politically expedient for him, possibly her, to overturn injustice. And so we invoke the prophets of religion only when we can turn nowhere else in this country, after we've already enslaved human bodies for hundreds of years. So, purportedly our Americanness is the tie that binds us together, but the politics of the American cult are awfully quick to exclude the impure, like zombies. I love zombies, okay? And the reason I love zombies is because it's a reflection on our time. All of these apocalyptic films that you like or don't like, the resurgence of zombies and zombies, millennials, they're not new. Like, ask your parents who are baby boomers, right, in the 60s and the 50s. Just always takes on it, you know, Godzilla, you know, that's the evil communists, you know, Japan. And so the zombies tell us about our politics and about our prejudices. So I'm just gonna go through a few iterations of our past prejudices. And what I mean by zombies is like, zombies are all the same. They're gonna destroy you. They're gonna destroy your way of life. They're gonna eat your children. They're gonna eat you, right? Oh, except there's this great like spoof on the zombies where like if you're a black zombie, no one wants you. Like if no one's afraid if you're, you know, they don't, yeah, anyway. If you're black, the zombies don't even want you. Okay. So, it's great. So zombie politics and prejudice in the US looks like this. Like we just zombify certain bodies. The zombies du jour are Muslims, right? You just happen to be on the chopping block. So let me tell you, colonization, American style. That's what it's about. Who are the new niggers of the day? I'm gonna use that word. African American are the real niggers. The First Nations, they're the prairie niggers. Muslims, since we presume them to be Arab, they're the sand niggers. Ethnic and religious prejudice, right? Because Americans don't even know that the majority of Muslims are of Southeast Asian and sub-Saharan African descent, right? I'll talk about this in my talk. An Arab Christian, a Palestinian, was killed in my home state by his neighbor. That's American. That's the American creed. So again, the preposterous politics of our presidential race, they just reflect the American creed. In a country where 25% of Muslim school children are bullied by their teachers. By their teachers. And that's the country we live in, and that's the dysfunctionality of religion, right? which is inseparable in this American context, most often Christianity, the majority religion, from that American creed. So inseparable that when teaching at a Christian college, my students had a hard time understanding how much capitalism had pervaded their views of what it means to be a person of faith, a Jesus follower. And that doesn't mean Jesus was a socialist. It just means that's how our blinders are on from birth, even in these religious spaces. So I just think we can't separate them. I also think religion is political, otherwise it's not being practiced. Our bodies are political. And so I think we can't separate religion and politics for those reasons.